Today's guest is Angela Bixby, who founded the Energy Intuit in 2011 after a series of synchronous events led to this body of her life's work. And as a psychic medium, energy healer, and consciousness coach, as well as a psychic development mentor, she serves humans most deeply in her conscious psychic program. So, Angela, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
You're welcome, Jessica. I'm great. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're absolutely very welcome. It's always a it's always nice when I have somebody that comes on here that comes in with a whole lot of self-awareness. And I know we touched on this off air because it really allows us to like dive right into the work. So I'm excited for it. And before we get into all of that, why don't you just contextualize for us like how is it that you got to do what you do and kind of explain to us a little bit more about, who you are and your business and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Jessica. So I am often asked, at what point did I know that I was psychic, being a professional psychic medium? There are so many stories out there of people that sort of knew their whole life that they were psychic. And I didn't find out until I was in psychic school in 2010, when I was at the age of in my early 40s, I'll say. I'm 55 now. And so it's just something that I didn't realize that I had. I wanted it. I was interested. I was always interested in the woo. Had done a ton of meditation through my whole life and found my way into all of these different pockets of spirituality and metaphysics. And so, but I really didn't know until I landed in psychic school. And at that point, began to understand that I had been an empath and claircognizant my whole life, right? So I had a couple of the clairs on board. And so from there, it was really just an experience of, as I said, I had some synchronous events that led to that. So a lot of weird spiritual things that started happening because I was asking for them, landed in psychic school. And from there, I just had this knowing that this would be what I did with the rest of my life. So I had had a career in healthcare sales and marketing. And I knew that I was changing that. I didn't know what it would look like or how it would go, but I've basically been on this path since then. I shed my day job in April of 13. So we're coming up on 10 years that I've been doing this work full time, had my practice full time, and it's evolved to a lot of different things. From that kind of day one point in psychic school, when I realized and had the epiphany that, oh, I really am psychic, I knew that I was going to help people connect to their intuition for the rest of my life. It's sort of as many people on the planet, right? I knew I had a very deep knowing that the more people that are connected to the type of work that you do, and their intuition, all of these sort of different facets of what we can do through our brains and our minds, that was really what my life's work was. So I've gone on since there.
That's a, beautiful story of like as always, right? You can follow the dots looking backwards, right? Like as the Steve Jobs quote states, right? And I've had a lot of different intuitives on both the show and as clients. And there's always that through line of like, there was a part of me that always knew it just needed its own timing to like blossom into this expression of the business, right? And now the business is becoming a vehicle for further, exploration and expression of that. So before we go on, like I just love for you to comment on that or add anything to that.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that up, right? I think that many of us that find ourselves doing this work professionally have that thread. And I would extrapolate that out to say that all humans are psychic. I have a knowing that we're all psychic. We all have a pineal gland in our brain and a pituitary gland and a physical body. Our physical body is our best divining rod. And so, I would say that anyone out there that has a sense that they're intuitive or psychic, you're right, you are. It's a matter of sorting out how that expresses, where your predominant clairs may lie, meaning like, do you see, do you hear, do you feel, do you know, those types of things, and then working with that. There are a lot of different things people can do to build on those skills and develop their intuition, their psychic skills. So I would say, in response to what you just shared, that anybody out there that's wondering or questioning, yes, you're psychic, go with it, develop it, find a teacher or mentor you like, or do some practices that you like, enjoy the process. It's kind of an not unknown anymore where we sit in history now, but historically it's been kind of an unknown set of skills and gifts that I really feel like everybody ought to kind of pull out and dust off and use in their life.
Could not agree more. So yes, 110% support that message and that sentiment. So yeah, I mean, from there, I think I would just love to dive into like, what is it that's happening for you right now? Like, what are the top problems that you're facing right now?
So I've had my business now for 12 years. And I've been in it long enough to kind of observe my own patterns within the context of my business. And I agree with so much of what you teach and demonstrate with what you do, in that I know that any business problems that I have are really me problems. And so I've been in observation of my patterns. I do that a lot at the beginning of the calendar year. It just sort of seems like a time when that comes up for me. As I'm in literal winter where I live, I do a lot of that deep contemplation. And so I've been looking at patterns a lot lately and over the years. And I know that consistency in my business practices is a challenge for me, and procrastination is a challenge for me. And so those seem to be kind of front of mind whenever I'm looking at improving things about myself. And so those are kind of the things that I think I've identified as part of my head trash, as you call it, that I'm open to receiving some support and shifting with you today.
Beautiful. So tell me a little bit more about this consistency in business practices and procrastination. Like, how does that specifically show up in your experience?
So I know in theory what I ought to be doing in terms of like sales and marketing, and how frequently I should be, writing to people, and how frequently I have things come up that I want to express, and then I just don't sort of complete that impulse and desire and drive to be consistent, right? So it's like I sort of know all of these things that I ought to be doing, and I feel good about those things. They aren't things that I actively resist. Yet, when you look at how I spend my time as a self employed entrepreneur, I clearly procrastinate and resist them and don't build consistency in enough. I sort of do just enough, right, for things to keep going. I really, really love service delivery and working with clients. So I will do things like stack up my calendar and see a lot more people, because I love to be of service to people and do the work that I do. It feels good to be in that energy with people. And so I sort of work within myself to go, oh, well, I've done a lot of work, right? And the things that go are the consistency in some of those sales and marketing practices, and the procrastination on tasks that aren't as fun as working with clients.
Got it. So you spend or prefer and do based off of like looking at the evidence in your schedule as much time as possible in the fulfillment of like working with the individuals,
Hmm.
not as much in the, let's just for lack of a better word, like the job of acquiring new clients. Is that
Hmm.
an accurate
Yes,
summary of that?
absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect. So given that, you deal with a lot of this type of stuff with clients, you have a skill set and intuitive ability to tune into things. If you had to apply your own gifts to your own situation, what might come up?
I do apply my own gifts to my situation. Absolutely. Great question. I get the messages from my guides and my guidance that I get from the external world, right? That I get from the marketing gurus and the business coaches. Get a little bit more consistent, whether it's 3 times a week that you're writing, or 1 time a week, or 3 times a month, just get consistent. So I get feedback from my guides. From my processes, I apply it to my situation. I get the same guidance, and I still have the same roadblocks where I don't seem to quite carry through on some of the things that I know I ought to do.
Got it. So really it's closing the gap between knowing I need to be more consistent and actually being more consistent.
Correct.
Okay. So what are your thoughts around that? Like if you had to explore that piece, what would happen?
I am really comfortable being kind of an outlier and a misfit and doing things in my own way, being a free spirit, whatever you want to call it, a wild card, right? It's why I'm in the work that I'm in. So what comes up for me is a lot of justification. Oh, you're consistent enough. Oh, you do things the way you do things, right? So a lot of that comes up for me when you pose that. Does that answer?
Well, I mean, it answers the question, yes.
Mhm.
There is further things that I would like to explore there. So, okay, so I'm comfortable being a misfit and this sort of free spirit. And this free spirit part of me just says, oh, you've done enough. right? Like you don't need to do anymore. Okay. So
Mhm.
is that really a like rebel or misfit energy? Or is that really more of an appeasing, lulling energy?
More appeasing and lulling. It's what come yes, yes, more appeasing and lulling, I would say.
Okay. So why do you think your brain went to label that as misfit and rebel initially?
Because it's cooler.
Right. So
It's more sexy.
correct, right? It's a
Mhm,
nicer bow to the truth,
mhm, mhm.
right? It is a nice defense and a nice protection mechanism towards what's actually present. So if you dive into deeper into that appeasing, lulling energy, what comes up for you there?
What's coming up for me, and I know you know the work that I do, and so I'm very much in the woo and kind of feeling and seeing what my guides are bringing forward with me as part of this process. There's something they're getting at about a way to calm myself when I'm alone. And what I would say to you is I'm really, really comfortable being alone and spending time alone and being in solitude. But I do believe there's something emotional here that's coming up around the soothing that comes from childhood, is what I'm seeing. It's like a version of myself as a child, 8-year-old child. Yeah. And
Okay.
so I think I know what it ties to. But yeah, so there's something here that feels like it's kind of a childhood thing that's there in the subconscious about soothing her through this process now as a 55-year-old still doing that. Does that make sense?
Got it. So yeah, there's some inner child work to be done as far
Mhm,
as this part that activates.
mhm,
Um, and if I could bring it back more to like I know it's all present, but if I can bring it back more to like the pattern itself, right? Being that it's a child like pattern, right? Being that it is one of appeasing and lulling, okay? And then being that your default, at least with regards to what you've shared, is okay, well, I will tune into my guides and I'll see what they say, which I'm in full support of it. And I love the fact that you can go there, right? There is an element of externalizing, or at least same thing, appeasing or lulling your own power, right? Like, let me go to my guides and see what they say, right? It's sexier to put the rebel misfit label onto this. Okay. It's something that I'm aware of, but I can't actually um, fix, or I can't actually eliminate. I'm not saying it's the whole pattern, but what comes up for you when I share kind of this lack of empowered choice in this?
I agree with you cognitively, and I feel like less is coming up emotionally. So, like, I'm not really feeling any resistance to it at all. I'm agreeing with it cognitively or intellectually. Does that make sense and answer your question?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it absolutely does. So yeah, and by all means, if something is like this guy's just full of BS, like by all means call me out. I have no
Oh,
issues
I will.
with that.
I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
perfect. Perfect. Um the reason that I bring this up is a lot of like what you're describing is rooted in this like fixing energy, right? Like even before we started, you did the diagnosis assessment. It's like I haven't counted it, but it's like a lot of things that you identified with as patterns. And I know you said, okay, some are like more than others, but I just identified all of them. So I know you turn up the volume on the things that you observe as like quote unquote bad or self-sabotaging, etc.
Mhm,
The reason that I bring that up is if we look at healing and let's just say define it as not fixing, but a returning to wholeness.
mhm.
Okay.
I'm
Like
with
if
you.
I'm sick and I heal, I return essentially to where I was before I got sick. I'm not really fixing or improving anything. Right.
Mhm,
The reason that I bring this up is your awareness and your keen ability to be aware of so many things, to me, it's kind of like the distortion of the gift. Like you're just perpetually looking and looping to see what else isn't fixed, what else needs changing. If I'm not consistent, and there's still clearly something that's a blind spot. The reason that I bring this up is like, to what degree is this about fixing? And to what degree is it just a lack of courage to walk in the wholeness that's already there?
I would say that it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. I'm with you on everything you've said. So when I was 7, I was hit by a car and had a near-death experience. And that's the age that they're taking me back to. And so it's a bit of both. And I think there's probably maybe 60% weight on restoration to wholeness versus fixing in what you've asked, based upon those aspects of my inner child that are still wanting to kind of be like integrated and brought back as part of the whole. Does that answer?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and then I would totally agree with you that I don't think it's one or the other. It's just to what's the degree to it. So as far as like solving the issue that's here, what comes up for you? Like knowing this discussion, what's coming up for you?
My guides are actually, or sort of my higher self, however you want to phrase it, is saying that it's probably closer to 70% restoration to wholeness, and that the restoration to wholeness is really the pathway for fixing this challenge. And I know what you speak of, because I have had enough experiences at my age with the work that I do and such. Even offering that with a dose of humility, of having those experiences where you feel like the patterns are no longer there after whatever things you've done to kind of work at them. So I feel like this restoration to wholeness is the big majority of what wants to be addressed. Does that make sense?
Yep. So what does that mean for you?
I feel like what that means for me is integrating those aspects of myself that were kind of fractured off when I had that near-death experience, from around that age of around 7, is the work that wants to be done in order to restore wholeness and no longer experience these problems as problems. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. So
Okay.
in that instance,
Mhm.
like who or what would you be at the completion of that integration?
Great question. This is where I feel like some version of what I might call fear of success comes up for me, right? So, I mean, you probably noticed I even felt myself kind of like sit up straighter and sit up taller, right? Because I'm kind of feeling into how to answer that question, right? I'm feeling into all of that I could be. And that feels scary. It feels like I'll be more vulnerable, and that's scary. Sorry, it's bringing up emotions as we talk about it. So, yeah, there's something here that wants to clear.
Absolutely. And as always, all of you is welcome. So whatever
Thank you.
you feel like needs to come up, by all means, you won't be the first or the last to show emotion on this podcast. So yeah, by all means, do whatever you need to do. Um, so what I'm going to just reflect back to you is essentially what I asked you is, who would you be in or from the perspective of your full wholeness?
Angela on steroids.
Okay, perfect. So that's the first time, right? Like that was the actual hint at the, whatever you want to call it, the answer that I was looking for. Even though I wasn't looking for anything specific. But the reason I pointed out is like, I'm asking you a hypothetical that I know you can tap into. In the first place that your brain and subsequently your resistance goes to is, I fear success, right? So even the prospect of integrating the pieces of you that make a laundry list of head trash and limiting patterns, the prospect of eliminating those and returning to wholeness is right away met with an absolute fear of success, to the point where you needed further prompting to actually get to a possible vague answer of what lies beyond there. Okay. So
Hmm.
what's coming up for you with that reflection?
Just a lot of yes, yes, ding, 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 ding. You're right. Accurate, accurate. And then sitting back and kind of observing potential versions of myself. And I hear you. I hear everything that you just reflected back to me and said. And for as much as I can sit down and work on manifesting like certain earnings and certain benchmarks in my business that connote success for me, I still don't have a concrete answer for you of who I would be or what that would look like with the restoration to wholeness, right? Which seems to me indicates a lot of room for a lot of work. Because I feel like I'm in this
Absolutely.
kind of void of like, what does that look like? Who do I look like? What is that about?
Correct. And to just bring it back to what we spoke about earlier, right? When I was asking you that distinction between, okay, to what degree is this like a return to wholeness, and to what degree is it like courage, and however we phrase that, this is another layer of what I'm essentially asking, right? Your gift of awareness, as powerful as it is, turned into its distortion quality, amplifies all of the things that are wrong, to the point where it's actually blocking out the essence of who you are underneath. Put a different way, so much of what you're creating out of desperation, not inspiration. I'm pushing
Yes.
through to try to manifest things that prove I'm not all of these broken list of things, instead of I'm being pulled towards creating the thing that is the highest expression of, my gift and the reason why I'm doing this business.
Hallelujah.
Okay.
Really?
So
Wow.
what
Yes.
comes up for you there? What's coming up?
Ding, ding, ding. So true. So true. So accurate. Yes, right on.
Okay. So then,
And like I feel a little bit of relief, even though I still feel tension in my body. I feel a little bit of relief.
okay, tell me more about the relief. What's the
Like
relief?
finally some answers and some
Okay.
direction for me to actually consciously move in to mend and restore to wholeness myself.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you dive a bit deeper into that aspect of you, like Angela on steroids,
Hmm.
tune in. Like who is Angela on steroids? Who are you without these limits?
Honestly, I still feel like I still feel myself bringing in the limitations.
And that's
So
fair. So just I'm gonna just invite you explore hypothetically to what degree you can, just beyond those.
earnings is a big one, right? Like my earnings would change in my business.
Mm-hmm.
There would be a lot more. I can tell you parameters, right? That's what comes up. So I would be earning more, I'd be working a little bit less, even though I like to work a lot. I would feel more balance in my life. But in terms of what that would look like, and the visibility and the vulnerability, I would be helping fewer people one to one and more in a group setting. And again, I'm not trying to go down this pat response um, pathway, because I know I can hear myself starting to do that. I want to be guesting on more podcasts, talking about my work. I want to be on TV. I want all of these things in theory. But when I think about it and picture that Angela on steroids, sort of doing all of those things and showing up in the world in a very visible way, in a very vulnerable way, it makes me really uncomfortable to even say it. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. So being more visible, being more vulnerable, essentially being bigger in your light.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Louder without the negative connotations of being louder, because there's a whole lot of stuff there too, right?
yeah.
About how noisy or how clanky I might be. But yes.
Well, even that, I think, is just an indicator of the limitation, right? Like you had to justify to me what you meant by louder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I would be loud, but just know, like, I wouldn't be obnoxiously loud. Like, I had zero connotations that you would be like, you do not strike me as somebody who would be obnoxiously loud. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So even just that, like, look how apologetic you are to be your biggest self, right? And
Correct.
even that answer, because I asked you essentially who you would be without these limitations, where you went to is what you would create, which fair enough was actually another question I was going to ask you. And that's fine. It's a beautiful vision. Earning a lot more, working a lot less, being in more balance with regards to what I receive versus what I give, helping a lot more people and in different containers, right? Being more visible, being more vulnerable, shining more light, being louder, right? All beautiful, right? And still avoiding the essential question that I asked you, which is like, who are you without these limitations? What qualities, what embodiment does Angelo on steroids actually mean? Like, what is that?
I can see myself and I can see how I am showing up in the world, like in a really simple way with people, with neighbors, with the world, kind of engaging with the world. And as articulate as I am, I feel like I don't have words to answer your question, right? Is sort of where I'm sitting in this resistance. I can tell you all of the roles that I play, all of the hats that I wear. I would be an as effective mother of adult children, right? I would be a business owner, but I don't think that's answering your question. I actually don't feel like I know how to answer your question at the moment.
So, congrats on coming to your edge, right? Because I think that that really much connotes exactly where you're at right now.
Mhm.
From the outside looking in, I think this is by far the biggest, let's just say, container of what's in front of you, right? I can't even imagine who I would be to create all of the things that I would want, right? That is a major, major block, right? From there comes the fear of success. From there comes whatever inner child healing needs to be done, right? With regards to the consistency and the patterns and what it means for you to take these emboldened actions,
Mhm.
right? From there, also, we're talking about that lulling energy. In
Mhm.
many ways, that's also a victimized energy. Like I will put
Correct.
bows on things that reinforce my victimhood, right? Because
Correct.
again, who am I without my limits is right
Mhm.
now blocked off to me. So, what comes up for you when I reflect that?
That you're really good.
Cool.
Sincerely, yeah, no, it's feeling really accurate and very effective. Yeah.
Okay. So, why don't you reflect it back to me in your words, right? Like you came in here thinking, okay, well, I have procrastination and consistency issues. What are you realizing now as the real issues?
That the work that I thought I had before me is less about, say, business behaviors that I would do towards my business directly. And it's a lot more about a me issue, right? And sort of emotional issues and things that want attention and focus. That if I can kind of address them more in the core of who I am, that's going to be the pathway to grow my business. To make sense what I said.
Yep,
Okay.
110% it does. So, what do you feel? Okay, let's actually let's ask it this way. So, you're recognizing, okay, so these aren't really business productivity, consistency things I have to fix. They're much more me problems.
Mhm.
What would fixing these actually create for you?
Strength and stability, personal stability and professional stability, like economically, financially, all of that. Does that make sense?
Okay. So,
Like I feel like they would give me a stronger foundation. The realizations that I'm having as we're moving through this and me being at this edge is that I think I feel like I'm on a shakier foundation than I ever really acknowledged. And I don't mean that so much as a negative or a victim, but I understand that being at this edge and working through these things and working on these things personally will offer me sort of a more stable feeling foundation, like a platform from which I can actually show up and say, okay, this is who I am, and this is what it would look like if I were on steroids in my business. That makes
Perfect.
sense.
It definitely does.
Okay.
So just in terms of like really driving that home,
Mhm.
verbalize what you're going to create from a strength and stability version of yourself.
I'm going to be more of an entrepreneur and more of the boss of my business, right? I'm going to make decisions about how I spend my time for different reasons than I feel like I've been operating from, right? So they'll be more grounded, sound, I would say maybe mature is a judgment word, decisions about how to approach my business rather than allowing like my inner child to kind of run the show and do what she wants on any given day. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's a great, again, going back to your observation quality, like it's a great observation of like, okay, well, this would have to be done. And I kind of have these qualities. What I'm really challenging you to do here is to give yourself permission and like verbalize in a very real way, not vaguely, but specifically, boldly, unapologetically, what would I create without these limits?
Within my business.
In your business, within your life. I mean,
Okay.
they're very interconnected. So
Okay. Just clarifying. Within my business, I would double the size of my coaching program, and like I would change how I'm spending my time and what I'm spending my time on. And I would be more in really where I want to be, where I feel passionate about the work that I do, as opposed to kind of what I feel like I need to do. And so those would be some of the things that I would do. I would put better boundaries on my time so that I can have more balance, as we talked about earlier, like personal time balanced with the professional. I see where like I have a pattern of overworking on all the levels, but even just literally like how many days a week I work is a little bit ridiculous. It doesn't matter how much I love work, it's a little ridiculous. So when I speak about balance, I'm kind of seeing and experiencing a lot of different ways and things where I would um, be more efficient in my business, be doing the things that I want to be doing as a means to, the end of having the business. In terms of personally, I would open up more vulnerably to new friends, to love. I haven't had a relationship in a while, so those things I feel like would naturally come in.
beautiful. So how does it feel to actually verbalize all of that?
Good. I don't feel like I'm being an imposter, but I feel a little bit like I'm a, and I'm not entirely uncomfortable saying it, but I feel like I'm very tenuous saying it. And it feels a little bit foreign to say these things because I feel like I'm saying them from a different space than I may have said them at the beginning of the call.
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I kept asking you to do essentially the same thing again and again. What you just did is basically a preview of what's on the other side of the Angela on steroids that you can't articulate or really define right now. Right? Like it took three very conscious, very, challenging prompts, however you want to call them, to even get you to semi articulate a vision of what life beyond this looping exploration of what's wrong actually looks like. Okay.
Mhm.
So now, given that you've had a taste of that, what's the gap between where you're at right now and really living that life from that space?
Are you asking me kind of emotionally, energetically, cognitively, or are you asking me what's the gap? Um, can you clarify a little bit more what you're asking me? I'm having a hard
Sure.
time
So,
with it.
just in your interpretation, based off of
Mhm.
everything that we've said, like, what do you feel like is the gap between where you're at right now and what you just previewed, a moment ago?
Yeah. Um, what's the gap? I feel like there are personal emotional things that I need to work on and release. and kind of close up shop on. Does that make sense? So that's
Yes.
part of the gap. So that's, I mean, that's sort of, I guess, in the gap. Those are the things that I need to do to bridge the gap. I guess I'm not really understanding the gap as much as I'm trying to kind of bring logic to what needs to be done to bridge the gap. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. So yeah, it was more just for my own clarification to see where you're at, right?
Mhm.
Because that's exactly like when I look at the notes that I've been taking throughout this call, right? It's like the gap here is there's the kind of victim energy of that lulling rebel, type energy we spoke about at the beginning, right? So they're like, I default to that. The inner child healing and integration, right? So whatever that has to do with consistency and like your actual work and action and what doesn't feel safe about it. The fear of success, fear of being seen, and fear of being vulnerable, right? The inability to imagine who I am without my limits. I think also we didn't touch on this, but you alluded to it, boundaries, right? The overwork, right?
Mhm.
I know oftentimes with healers and individuals like yourself, you're a lot more comfortable with giving than you are receiving. So you will overgive at the
Mhm.
expense of yourself, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so that confirmed. Um, that is what's creating, as you said, the shakier foundation that I've acknowledged, right? So those,
Mhm.
whatever that is, 6 or 7 things,
Mhm.
just from this conversation, that's the gap.
Mhm.
Okay, so how does that land for you?
Very accurately and very well. And I have a whole lot, sort of a whole nother track running of things specifically that are coming up around when I was hit by a car and parental stuff. And so, yeah, I have a lot kind of coming in as you're recapping that and defining what the gap is. So I'm still kind of, I apologize if I seem distracted. I've got this other loop kind of running about where the work can be done, but it doesn't feel like it's the old negative loop of kind of victim and desperation.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. I
Okay.
don't think, I think it's more of a realization and
Mhm.
now like a preview of, okay, so these are the things that are in front of me, right? So I think
Mhm.
it's a beautiful spot to be in, and it's more now just going in, right? Revealing, healing, and eliminating all of
Mhm.
those patterns, right?
Mhm.
From, and I know you know this, but from not just the energetic aspects, but the emotional, somatic, and then habitual aspects, right? So that your baseline can be one, as we talked about before, not creating out of desperation to prove away these weaknesses, but out of inspiration because I can now see myself as whole.
Mhm. Yes, it's
Perfect. So,
beautiful.
well, thank you for being open to allow yourself and us to go there. So why don't you then just close us off with a summary of, what did you come into here thinking was the issue, and then what are your realizations that you're taking out of it?
Because I was on a tour all of 2022 of a bunch of different business coaches and having this idea that somebody had some answer for me in terms of how to fix my business. And of course, it was met with some failures and disappointments. And that wasn't the problem, right? Like I'm having this epiphany with you. I knew that it was probably a me problem, but I'm understanding better how this work for my inner child, like this personal work, is really critical for me to embody the business owner, the entrepreneur that I know myself to be, even though I can't quite define her yet. So it's really just, it's refreshing to kind of get to the root of what really I thought my problem was last year when I was on a tour of a bunch of different business coaches and such, right? So it's refreshing to really feel like I found where the work is for myself. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. So perfect. In that case, why don't you just close us off with letting everybody know where to find you, who's the best person to find you? Floor is yours for that.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. My website is the best place to go, energyintuit.com. So that's ENERGYINTUIT.com. My passion is my conscious psychic program, and I love to support people in a container that helps you to grow your intuition, right? So you're someone, if you want to work with me, you're someone that has a sense of how they connect and that they connect, and you're in a position where you want to take that up about 5 levels through the conscious psychic program. So I invite you to find information on my website. You can contact me there. Let me know if you have any questions about that, and I would love to support you in that if that feels right for you.
Beautiful. Well, as always, we'll include that in the show notes. But Angela, thank you very much for being on and being open in the way that you were. And for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Beautiful. Thanks, Jessica.